All right, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to our latest explainer. Today, we're taking what might look like a super dense set of writing rules and transforming it into an incredibly practical toolkit for effective scholarly communication. Whether you're a student submitting assignments or a professional sending manuscripts off to a journal, the way you craft your sentences literally dictates how your ideas are received. So we're going straight to the source today, drawing directly from the foundational guidelines on writing style and grammar to show you exactly how to elevate your writing.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover the goal of scholarly writing, then mastering continuity and flow. After that, achieving conciseness and clarity, followed by perfecting your verb usage, and we'll wrap up by navigating pronoun rules.
Okay, starting with Section 1, the goal of scholarly writing, clear communication. The core philosophy of everything we're going to talk about today is actually pretty straightforward. The main objective of scholarly writing is clear communication. Sounds simple, right? But achieving it requires presenting ideas in an orderly and concise manner. Every single precise word choice, every well-structured sentence contributes to a really impactful piece of work. Because if your writing is messy, your arguments are just naturally going to seem less credible to the reader. It really is that simple.
Moving right along to Section 2, mastering continuity and flow, guiding the reader. So, effective writing absolutely needs continuity, which is the logical consistency of your expression, and flow, which is the smooth cadence of your words. When text sounds choppy or just abruptly abandoned, readers get lost almost immediately. That is exactly where transitional links come in. Think of these like little bridges. You've got time links to show a sequence, cause-effect links to show logic, addition links to build on a point, and contrast links to pivot. By placing these strategically, you connect your paragraphs so the reader never has to stop and guess how one idea actually relates to the next.
But hey, even with great transitions, you can still totally trip up your reader. I mean, have you ever felt completely lost reading a dense academic sentence? Yeah, you might have been the victim of the dreaded noun string. A noun string happens when you place several nouns right after one another just to modify one final noun. The source notes that this basically forces your reader to hit the brakes and question how all these words actually relate to each other.
This comparison brilliantly illustrates the fix. Listen to this wordy noun string. Skin fold test body fat percentage examination. Wow. It's exhausting just to read aloud, isn't it? To untangle this mess, the source advises moving the final noun earlier in the phrase and using prepositions or verbs to show the relationships. So, the better structure becomes a caliper examination to determine body fat percentage. Sure, it takes a couple more short words, but the relationships are instantly crystal clear.
All right, Section 3, achieving conciseness and clarity, cutting the fluff. The golden rule here is simple. Literally only say what needs to be said. An author who is frugal with words writes a much more readable paper. Unconstrained wordiness basically just lapses into embellishment, which distracts from your actual science. I mean, why say at the present time when you can just say now? Why say for the purpose of when for or to does the exact same job? Stripping away all this extra fluff makes your prose transparent and accurate.
Now, clarity also means being logically precise. And a major pitfall in academic writing is anthropomorphism. This is when we accidentally attribute human characteristics to animals or, more often, to inanimate sources. It happens all the time when writers are trying to be concise, but it ends up creating these weirdly misleading statements.
Consider this example. Saying, "the theory concludes" is actually incorrect. Why? Well, because a theory doesn't have a brain. It can't draw a conclusion. A theory might address, indicate, or present something, but it's the researchers, the humans, who actually do the concluding. You always want to make sure your verbs match the true capabilities of your subjects.
Ambiguity can also totally strike when we make comparisons. Take this sentence right from the source. 12-year-olds were more likely to play with age peers than 6-year-olds. What does that actually mean? Does it mean 12-year-olds play with age peers more than 6-year-olds do? Or does it mean 12-year-olds prefer playing with age peers rather than playing with 6-year-olds? When you omit key words, your reader's left totally guessing. You have to make direct, logical comparisons.
Okay, moving down to the micromechanics. Section 4, perfecting your verb usage, precision in action.
Verbs are your vigorous, direct communicators, and choosing the exact right tense is absolutely vital. You'll notice how your tense needs to shift depending on what section of your paper you're in. If you're doing a literature review, you might use the past tense for a specific study, or present perfect to describe ongoing research. But in your methods section, when you're describing a procedure you've already finished, that should firmly be in the past tense, like participants completed a survey.
Alongside tense, we've got to talk about voice. Voice describes the relationship between a verb and the subject and object. You have active voice, where the subject acts, and passive voice, where the subject receives the action. While both are technically permitted in scholarly writing, many writers severely overuse the passive voice, and that's what leads to wordy, evasive-sounding text.
The general rule of thumb: use active voice as much as you possibly can for direct, clear sentences, like, the patients took the medication orally. You know exactly who did what. But, and this is a big but, passive voice is totally acceptable and even preferred when you want to focus on the recipient of the action rather than the actor. For example, in an experimental setup, the speakers were attached to either side of the chair. It really doesn't matter who attached them. The placement of those speakers is what's actually important for the research.
Before we leave verbs behind, we have to tackle a super common error: subject and verb agreement. A verb has to agree with its subject, even when sneaky little intervening phrases try to mess you up. In the incorrect example here, the phrase, as well as the speed, sits right between the singular subject percentage and the verb. This tricks writers into using the plural verb increase, but the core subject is percentage, which is singular, so the correct verb is increases. Always trace your verb back to its true subject.
And finally, Section 5, Navigating Pronoun Rules. Who is speaking? Pronouns replace nouns, and every single pronoun needs a clear antecedent so we aren't guessing who did what. The rules here are actually really clear-cut. If you are writing a paper by yourself, use I. Please don't use we if you don't actually have co-authors. If you do have co-authors, then use we. Importantly, do not refer to yourself in the third person as the author or the researcher. It just sounds clunky. And if you need to highlight a specific contribution by one of your co-authors, just use the third person to name them directly.
One specific trap the source warns about is the editorial we. This is when you use we to refer to people in general, rather than your specific research team. In a multi-authored paper, this is incredibly confusing. The reader is left wondering, wait, do you mean all of humanity? Do you mean everyone in your profession? Or do you just mean you and your co-author?
So how do we fix it? Well, if you say we typically study decision-making in a laboratory setting, it's just way too vague. Instead, substitute a more specific noun to remove all that doubt. Psychological researchers typically study decision-making. See, this tightens up the scholarly tone and ensures absolute clarity for your reader.
And that brings us to the end of our toolkit. We've covered the whole shebang, from the macro level of flow and transitions, all the way down to the precise use of active verbs and specific pronouns. Remember, the ultimate goal of all scholarly writing is clear communication. So I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought from today's explainer. When you look at your very next draft, I want you to ask yourself, are your words serving your ideas or are they simply burying them? Use this toolkit to strip away the fluff, clarify your subjects, and let your research truly shine. Thanks so much for joining me, and happy writing.